Today's story begins in a quiet neighborhood where nothing truly bad was supposed to ever happen. Kids played freely, neighbors waved at each other every morning, and the streets always looked clean and calm. People moved here because they wanted safety. They wanted peace. And for Mark Dalton, a retired Navy SEAL, this place was the first home that ever felt like a chance to finally breathe after years of intense service. For him and his daughter, Lily, this neighborhood wasn't just a home, it was hope. But sometimes, trouble doesn't come with warning sirens or loud footsteps. Sometimes it comes disguised as authority. And in this neighborhood, trouble took the form of a group of men pretending to be HOA security officers. Men who wore fake uniforms, drove an SUV with a cheap HOA enforcement sticker, and acted like they had real legal power over everyone. People had seen them around for weeks. They drove slowly, staring at houses, writing things on clipboards, handing out fake violation notes. At first, residents thought it was normal, maybe new HOA rules or new security checks. But after a while, things became strange. They weren't polite. They weren't professional. They barked orders. They scared kids. They yelled from their SUV windows at anyone who didn't follow their made-up rules. Mark ignored them at first. After all, he believed in not engaging unless necessary. His life was finally peaceful. He didn't want drama. He'd spent years dealing with real threats in real situations. He didn't want to fight battles at home. But one afternoon, everything changed. And it changed in a way that no father should ever have to experience. It was around 3 p.m. The sunlight was warm, the wind gentle. Lily, who was only 7, was practicing riding her little pink bicycle. She was still learning, still a bit shaky, but full of determination. She would pedal forward, wobble, fix her balance, and smile proudly at her dad. Mark sat on the front porch steps, cheering her on every time she made a little improvement. "You're doing great," he said. "Keep your eyes forward. You're getting better every second." Lily giggled, riding a few feet more before stopping to catch her breath. She adjusted her helmet and started again. For Mark, these small moments were priceless, the kind of moments he missed during his years of service. He promised himself he would never take them for granted. Meanwhile, the black SUV with the fake HOA patrol sign entered the street again. Slowly. Quietly. Almost like it wanted attention. The driver wore sunglasses even though it wasn't sunny anymore. The passenger had a radio clipped to his shirt, though it wasn't connected to anything real. Neighbors stopped what they were doing and watched. Everyone always watched when this SUV appeared. People didn't trust it. They didn't trust the men inside it. But because nobody wanted conflict, everyone stayed silent. This time, however, the SUV came faster. Much faster than usual. The driver was irritated, muttering something under his breath. Maybe he was annoyed someone parked slightly crooked. Maybe he was upset a trash can wasn't perfectly aligned. Or maybe he just liked the feeling of control. Either way, he didn't slow down near the houses where kids always played. He didn't slow down when he saw Lily riding her bike near the curb. He didn't slow down despite seeing a child directly ahead. Instead, he honked, loudly, aggressively, and the SUV swerved far too close to her. Lily panicked. She tried to steer away, but her small hands weren't strong enough. She toppled sideways, her bike falling. She landed on the street, her legs stretched out, and before she could pull them back, the SUV's front tire rolled over her shins. Mark saw it happen. He saw the moment her body hit the ground. He heard the small scream, a scream no father forgets. And he felt something inside him break. Not his control. Not his training. But something deeper. The pure instinct of a parent. He ran. He ran faster than he had in years. His heartbeat was pounding, not from fear, but from focus. Lily was crying, holding her legs, and the SUV had stopped only because Mark stepped directly in front of it. The driver froze. The passenger looked terrified. They hadn't expected real consequences. They hadn't expected a Navy SEAL to be the father of the child they just hurt. Mark didn't yell. He didn't punch anyone. He didn't lose control. Instead, he leaned down, checked Lily quickly, and told her, "I'm here. I'm right here. You're okay. I'm not going anywhere." His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. Focused. Sharp. He stood up and walked to the driver's window. The men tried to defend themselves immediately. She was in the way. Kids shouldn't bike on the street. HOA rules say. Mark cut them off with a single sentence. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just precise. You ran over a child. The street went silent. Neighbors gathered. People whispered. Someone called the real HOA president. Someone else recorded from the sidewalk. The men inside the SUV finally realized how big a mistake they had made. Mark told them to step out of the vehicle. The driver hesitated, but when Mark repeated his request, calm, controlled, steady, they listened. They got out slowly, hands shaking. He didn't threaten them. He didn't touch them. He simply asked the questions that mattered. Who gave you authority? Where are your credentials? Why are you patrolling in fake uniforms? Do you understand impersonating security is a crime? The men stuttered. They had no answers. Their badges were fake plastic. Their citations were fake. Their SUV decals were fake. Everything about them was a show that now had real consequences because they hurt the wrong child. Mark documented everything. Pictures. Videos. Witness statements. He collected more evidence in 15 minutes than these fake officers could argue against in a lifetime. And when he was done, he looked at them one final time and said, "You won't step foot in this neighborhood again." The driver tried to mutter something, but the gathered neighbors had already turned against them. They weren't scared anymore. They were angry. They wanted justice. They were done being intimidated by fakes. And for the first time, the fake HOA cops weren't in control. They were exposed. They were trapped. And they knew it. The neighborhood grew silent as the fake HOA cops stood awkwardly beside their SUV. People who had never spoken up before were now stepping closer, whispering about all the times these men had harassed them. One elderly neighbor said they once threatened to fine her because her garden hose was visible. Another said they yelled at her teenage son for walking home too slowly. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been annoyed, scared, or irritated. But until now, nobody had the courage to stand up to them. Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke louder than anything the fake officers could say. He crouched down beside Lily again, brushing her hair gently away from her face. She was crying, but holding on. She kept telling him, "Daddy, I'm okay. I'm okay," even though her little voice trembled. Her legs hurt, but she was brave, braver than the grown men who had caused this mess. A few neighbors brought ice packs and soft cushions. Another neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, ran inside to get a small blanket. She wrapped it around Lily and held her hand. There was a feeling in the air, a sense that the whole community had finally united over one thing: protecting this child and holding the fake officers accountable. Meanwhile, the real HOA president, Mr. Fraser, arrived. He drove up in his small sedan, confused at first, but the moment he stepped out and saw the crowd, he knew something serious had happened. People rushed toward him, explaining everything at once: the SUV, the fake uniforms, the injury to Lily, the dangerous driving. Mr. Fraser wasn't a confrontational man. He was the type who liked quiet meetings and emails. But even he couldn't hide the shock on his face when he saw the decals on the SUV close-up. He shook his head slowly, realizing the HOA had never hired any security officers. Nobody authorized these men. Nobody approved any patrols. These men had been impersonating HOA enforcement without permission. And now the entire neighborhood knew. Mark stood up and handed Mr. Fraser the fake citations he had collected. Some were comical, lines like, "Violation, grass too green," and, "Fine, $50 for leaving door open too long." But others were more serious, threatening letters telling residents their properties could be seized if they didn't comply. Everything was fake. Everything was manipulative. The fake officers tried to explain themselves again. The driver spoke quickly, tripping over his own words. He said they were only trying to help keep the neighborhood in order. He claimed the HOA board secretly approved them. But the more he spoke, the more obvious it became that they were lying. Mr. Fraser held up a hand to silence them. "We never approved you. Not once. Not ever." His voice shook, partly out of embarrassment, partly out of anger. "You've made a mockery of our entire community." The men looked around helplessly, realizing nobody believed them anymore. The confidence they used to walk around with was gone. Their arrogance had crumbled. They were exposed, humiliated, and cornered. Mark stayed calm, his hand gently resting on Lily's shoulder. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need revenge. All he wanted was accountability, for them to face the consequences of their reckless behavior. Paramedics arrived shortly after. They checked Lily's legs carefully, speaking to her softly to keep her calm. She winced a little when they touched her shins, but they reassured Mark it wasn't a serious injury, bruising and swelling, but no fractures. She would heal with rest and care. Mark felt a heavy weight lift off his chest when he heard that. He whispered, "You're strong, sweetheart," and kissed her forehead. The paramedics placed her on a small stretcher, not because she needed it urgently, but because they wanted her to rest without pressure on her legs. She held Mark's hand tightly, never letting go. He walked beside her as they prepared to move toward the ambulance for a routine check. The neighbors clapped softly for her bravery, trying to lift her spirits. The fake HOA officers watched all this with growing guilt. Or fear. Or both. The reality of what they had done was finally hitting them. They didn't expect this. They thought people would always be scared of their fake authority. They didn't expect the neighborhood to stand together. They definitely didn't expect a Navy SEAL dad. The police arrived next. Not the fake ones, the real ones, in real uniforms, with real authority. Blue and red lights reflected off the houses. 2 officers stepped out, calm and professional. They listened to Mark first. He showed them the photos, the fake badges, the fake citations, and the SUV decals. They listened to the neighbors who had gathered around. Everyone wanted to talk. Everyone had evidence. Everyone wanted these men gone. The real police officers asked the fake HOA cops to step aside. They questioned them separately. The driver tried to insist it was all a misunderstanding. He said it was a volunteer program. But when asked for proof, he had none. When asked for certification, he had none. When asked about the fake badge, he had nothing to say. One officer inspected the badge closely and said, "This is plastic." The crowd murmured. Even the passenger looked embarrassed. Another officer peeled the HOA decal off the SUV with one hand. It came off easily, too easily, like it was just printed last night. People shook their heads in disbelief. The officers finally turned to Mark again. They thanked him for staying calm and collecting all the necessary information. Most people in this situation would have exploded in anger. But Mark wasn't most people. Years of discipline had taught him that calmness wasn't weakness, it was strength. Especially when protecting the people he loved. The police informed everyone that impersonating security, especially in a residential area, was a serious offense. They said the 2 men would face charges. The fake officers' faces drained of color. Reality hit them harder than anything. They weren't just being told to leave, they were being held accountable. Their days of pretending to have power were officially over. As the police escorted them toward the patrol car, the driver turned back, almost looking for sympathy. But he found none. Not from the neighbors, not from the HOA president, and definitely not from Mark. Everyone knew the truth now. Everyone knew what these men had been doing. And nobody wanted to hear their excuses. When the patrol car doors closed behind them, a wave of relief spread through the street. People started talking again, louder this time, freer. They thanked Mark for stepping in. They thanked the paramedics. They thanked each other for standing together. The neighborhood had been silent for too long. Today, they finally found their voice. The sun began to set, casting warm colors over the homes. Lily, now calmer, was sitting inside the ambulance with a juice box, chatting softly with one of the medics. Mark stood beside her, holding her hand and watching her closely. She squeezed his fingers and smiled weakly. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered. And this time, he believed her. The neighborhood returned to a peace it hadn't felt in weeks, maybe even months. No fake patrols. No intimidation. No more fear. Just families, kids, laughter, and the quiet comfort of knowing that someone finally stood up for them. When the patrol car doors closed behind them, a wave of relief spread through the street. People started talking again, louder this time, freer. They thanked Mark for stepping in. They thanked the paramedics. They thanked each other for standing together. The neighborhood had been silent for too long. Today, they finally found their voice. The sun began to set, casting warm colors over the homes. Lily, now calmer, was sitting inside the ambulance with a juice box, chatting softly with one of the medics. Mark stood beside her, holding her hand and watching her closely. She squeezed his fingers and smiled weakly. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered. And this time, he believed her. The neighborhood returned to a peace it hadn't felt in weeks, maybe even months. No fake patrols. No intimidation. No more fear. Just families, kids, laughter, and the quiet comfort of knowing that someone finally stood up for them. But the story didn't end there. Because the next day, something unexpected happened. Early the next morning, Mark woke up to light knocking on the door. When he opened it, he found 3 neighbors standing there, Mrs. Hayes from across the street, Mr. Parker from the corner house, and a young couple who had just moved in 2 months earlier. All of them looked tired, but determined. Mrs. Hayes spoke first. "Mark, we need your help. We want to change this HOA. For good." Mark sighed. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't trying to become some kind of community leader. He was just a dad who wanted his daughter safe. But he also knew what happened yesterday wasn't random. It was the result of people staying silent too long. He invited them inside. They sat around the dining table with coffee mugs, pages of notes, and stories, so many stories, of harassment, threats, fake fines, and intimidation by the same 2 men who were now in police custody. For the first time, Mark realized something bigger. This wasn't just about Lily. This was about the whole neighborhood living in fear. So he listened. He took notes. He gathered testimonies. And by noon, he had compiled everything into a detailed report. Meanwhile, Lily was sitting on the couch nearby, drawing pictures. She drew the paramedics. She drew the neighbors helping her. And then she drew something unexpected. A picture of her dad standing like a shield between her and the SUV. Mark saw it and felt something in his chest tighten. He hadn't thought of himself as a hero. But to his daughter, he already was. By the end of the week, word spread. More neighbors came forward. People who had never talked before showed up at Mark's door with written statements, pictures, videos, documents, evidence collected over months. Mark stayed patient. Organized. Calm. His military discipline helped him keep everything clear. He labeled folders. Made copies. Cross-checked details. He wanted no mistakes. Because this time, the HOA board would have no choice but to hear them. The meeting day arrived. For the first time in years, the community center was packed. Families lined the walls. Elderly residents filled every chair. Parents holding babies stood along the back. Everyone was waiting. The HOA board members entered, looking confused. They weren't used to such a crowd. They weren't used to accountability. Mark stood up when his name was called. He walked to the front with the same calm presence he carried the day of the incident. He placed a stack of folders on the table. "Everything you need to see is right here," he said. "Not opinions. Not rumors. Evidence." He showed them. Videos of fake patrol cars speeding. Photos of fake uniforms. Audio of threats made to families. Records of false citations. Testimonies from over 40 residents. Medical reports proving Lily was injured. And the police report confirming impersonation of security. The room fell silent. Neighbors watched as the board members flipped through the pages. Shock turned into embarrassment. Embarrassment turned into guilt. And finally, guilt turned into action. The board voted, unanimously, to remove the 2 men from all HOA involvement permanently. Their access to neighborhood meetings, community tools, and shared spaces was revoked. Notices were sent out. Policies were rewritten. Multiple committees were dissolved and rebuilt from scratch. For the first time, the HOA was no longer controlled by fear. It was shaped by the people. 1 month later, everything felt different. Kids played freely on the street again. Families sat outside in lawn chairs, something nobody had dared to do before. The atmosphere was lighter, safer, healthier. Mark walked Lily to school every morning. She had recovered fully, physically and emotionally. But she still held his hand tightly whenever a large vehicle passed by. He didn't mind. He squeezed her hand right back. One evening, as the sun lowered and the street glowed with golden light, the neighborhood held a small gathering, just a simple barbecue in the cul-de-sac. Mark arrived with Lily, who immediately ran off to play with her friends. Several neighbors approached him. One said, "You saved this community." Another added, "We needed someone brave enough to stand up." A third said quietly, "You gave us back our peace." Mark shook his head. "I didn't save anything. You all did this together." But in their eyes, he was the reason they found the courage to speak. Later that night, as Mark and Lily walked home, she looked up and asked, "Daddy, are the bad guys gone forever?" Mark smiled softly. Yes, sweetheart. They're gone. And they're not coming back. She nodded and hugged his arm. Good. I like it when everyone is nice again. And Mark realized something. It wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about authority. It wasn't even about being strong. It was about protecting the peace his daughter deserved, and the peace every family in that neighborhood finally had.